Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. The wind turbines aren't spinning in Texas, but the politicians certainly are. The left-wing newspaper Austin American-Statesman reported that nearly half of Texas installed wind power generation has been offline because of frozen wind turbines. And now, with record cold having set in, there are 4.3 million people in Texas without power. This came just 3 days after USA Today was bragging about wind power in Texas. Wind energy had a banner year in 2020. Here's what that means for Joe Biden's climate plan. Wind energy doesn't actually have anything to do with climate, but due to a massive propaganda campaign, many people believe that it does. And now, with the wind turbines frozen and motionless and 4.3 million Texans without power, the real spin is beginning. I sent the Austin American-Statesman article about frozen wind turbines to Andy Revkin, and he responded by saying that I'm spinning convenient and false narratives. Reality, frozen wind farms were just a small piece of Texas power woes. I don't actually write for the Austin American-Statesman, so it isn't clear to me why Andy is accusing me of spinning. I was just reporting what the Austin American-Statesman said. But there is lots of spinning going on trying to take the blame away from failed green energy. Do not point too many fingers at Texas wind turbines because they're not the main reason broad swaths of the state have been plunged into darkness. While ice has forced some turbines to shut down, just as a brutal cold wave drives record electricity demand, wind only comprises 25% of the state's energy mix this time of year. The majority of outages overnight were plants fueled by natural gas, coal, and nuclear, which together make up more than 2/3 of power generation during winter. The wind is not solely to blame, said Wade Schauer, Research Director of America's Power and Renewables at Wood Mackenzie. He estimated that about 27 gigawatts of coal, nuclear, and gas capacity is unavailable, in part because the cold has driven up demand for natural gas for heating. That's the bigger problem. The Austin American-Statesman said that nearly half of the turbines were shut down. So as demand increases and wind turbines are shutting down, that's causing a huge problem. And to make matters worse, the oil and gas industry in West Texas is also dependent on wind. So when the wind went down, the oil and gas industry did as well. The wind went down, that took down oil and gas prices went through the roof. The wind industry can point their fingers at oil and gas and be partly correct because the oil and gas industry also made the mistake of being dependent on wind. Another reason why there's not enough natural gas is because climate activists have been shutting down gas pipelines. Climate activists are responsible for the failed dependence on wind, and they're also responsible for the lack of supply of natural gas. On his first day occupying the Oval Office, Joe Biden shut down the Keystone Pipeline to Texas. The fraudsters at PolitiFact and Facebook jumped into this discussion a couple days ago. A Facebook post appearing 8 days after the order claimed stopping the pipeline did not change our use of oil. It just made oil more expensive for us to use. Thanks, Joe. What an idiot. The post was flagged as part of Facebook's efforts to combat false information and misinformation on its newsfeed. Read more about our partnership with Facebook. There's no evidence yet that Biden's decision, which fulfilled a campaign promise dating back to at least May 2020, triggered any spike in oil prices that affects consumers now. Let's take a look at PolitiFact and Facebook's claim and see if it's correct. Right after it became clear that Democrats had successfully stolen the election, energy prices skyrocketed. People knew that Biden was going to shut down as much of the American energy industry as he could. He did that, and now poor and middle class people are struggling to pay their energy bills even as record cold has spread across the country. PolitiFact and Facebook are committing fraud, and they're using it as an excuse to violate other people's freedom of speech. What they're doing is straight out of George Orwell's Ministry of Truth. People who are spinning the failure of green energy in Texas are trying to place the blame on the grid operators, saying that they should have anticipated very cold weather. But the reason that they didn't anticipate cold weather is because Texas leading climate academics said 10 years ago that Texas was going to be hot and dry for the rest of the century. The NPR station in Austin said less than a year ago that the warm weather was caused by climate change and that winters were going to be warm in the future. Climate academics like Katherine Hayhoe and Andrew Dessler convinced the Texas government that they didn't need to worry about cold weather. What they needed to be worried about was hot weather. They also convinced the government to become dependent on wind power and not to build pipelines. The huge mess Texas is facing now traces directly back by three roots to junk climate science. These academics don't know what they're talking about, and they appear to never learn from their mistakes. 10 years ago, they said that Texas was going to be hot and dry for the rest of the century. But precipitation has been increasing in Texas for the past 120 years, and since that prediction was made in 2011, Texas has had its wettest years on record. Texas is also facing record cold and has historic amounts of snow on the ground. You would think they might learn from their mistakes, but that doesn't appear to be the case with Texas climate academics. Just last summer, they were right back at it, saying Texas will soon face the driest conditions of last 1,000 years. Never mind that they're getting wetter, and they just had the wettest conditions of the last 125 years. In his farewell speech 60 years ago, President Eisenhower warned of the dangers of a scientific and technological elite seizing control of public policy, and that's exactly what we see going on in Texas right now. If we're going to survive, we need to stop listening to these climate fraudsters and get back to government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This incompetent scientific and technological elite are directly threatening our health and well-being. Wind not only fails when you need it the most during the winter, but it also fails during the hottest times of summer. And wind power is also causing massive amounts of damage, decimating raptor populations. 10 years ago, Toto got attacked by an owl. But that's a part of life. I love raptors, and they are an essential part of our ecosystem. It would be an environmental and a human disaster to try to run the country off wind power, as Texas is finding out right now. In green Ontario, wind and solar frequently only produce 2% of their electricity needs. Anyone with half a brain understands that we need fossil fuels and other sources of energy like nuclear. But unfortunately, not everybody has even half a brain.
But kiddo, I want you to just take a look, okay? You don't have to agree. But I want you to look in my eyes. I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate. Okay?
I personally don't like freezing in the dark like many people in Texas are doing now due to the foolish decisions of their political leaders. Many climate scientists are terrified of carbon dioxide, which is an essential component of all life on Earth. Perhaps they should go back to elementary school and start all over again. In his novel 1984, George Orwell wrote, "We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it's an end." Climate scientists have seized control with their scam, and it's going to be very difficult to get them to give it up. And just about all journalists are complicit as well. Andy is one of the better ones because he actually responds once in a while. Most of the rest of them just keep their heads buried in the snow. They want you to believe that carbon dioxide, the source of all life on Earth, is a pollutant. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on this nonsense for the past 13 years. You can visit him and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.